This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
The internet connection is always fine until it isn't, right? But no, I think we're in a little bit better shape now. Look at that. We got Ira taking off his glasses. So it is our favorite time of the year, at least my favorite time of the year, when it comes to the NBA calendar. Transaction season, rumors, innuendo, everything that's out there. We want to get to it all. And I want to start with kind of the news of the last 24 hours. And I know it's not necessarily directly impacting the Miami Heat, but it kind of was. Let's start with the drama in Brooklyn. I do want to get to the PJ Tucker situation because I have a take on this that seems to be counter to what some people are thinking. So we'll get into that, and then just general stuff you're hearing about the Heat. But let's start with the Brooklyn Nets situation. And I think my favorite line of this whole NBA offseason so far was Kyrie Irving choosing to not take a $30 million pay cut and saying that he's daring to be different. So, like, does that mean that the next time I actually cash my paycheck or actually accept the money for the jobs, does that mean that I'm daring to be different? Am I cutting against the grain by doing that? What was your take on how this whole thing played out?
You know what? From the get-go, Clay, like you pointed out, the only way for Kyrie to get his desired result, which apparently, and maybe even somewhat shockingly, was to get to the Los Angeles Lakers for a reunion with LeBron James, was to go down to the taxpayer mid-level, not even the full mid-level, not the 10-3, but the 6.4, and give himself probably a haircut in the range of $26 to $31 million. And everyone's like, well, no one does that. And then everyone started, but if anyone would, it might be Kyrie Irving because he's all over the place. And whether it's a family member, whether it's an agent, whether it's just someone saying, hey, there's nothing guaranteed in your career. You go for 1 year somewhere, you get an injury, your career is over. So instead, he casts it differently. And it's interesting because obviously there's the Woj and the Shams and the news breaking. And it almost is like, where can a player shop his message where someone will actually buy the BS? And he delivered it to Sham's doorstep. And he said, not only am I coming back to the Nets, who I love, but I'm coming back with this statement of my unique personality and how much it means for me to be back in Brooklyn and to make it work with Kevin Durant, which I'm not sure anyone believes. And here's the thing. If Kyrie Irving is going to be the guy who even he goes for the money, then we can all sort of sit back and say, well, would Bradley Beal therefore leave tens of millions of dollars on the table? With some of these other players who we're talking about, the money doesn't matter. It'll come back to me later. The money matters. The money matters to the most philosophical player in the NBA, to the most stubborn player in the NBA, maybe the most self-centered player in the NBA. And that's important because that's how free agency was set up. Free agency was set up if you stay with your current team, if you provide stability, if you grow something somewhere, you make more money through your bird rights, through your early bird rights, through maximum extensions. And of all people, to show that the system can work, Kyrie Irving, at least right now, has shown that at the end of the day, the majority, if not every NBA player, will take the money and run.
And I want to kind of get rid of the whole stigma of like taking the money in the first place, because you had the quarterback who committed to University of Miami yesterday, and there was he's calling them false reports, and who really knows what's going on there, but basically saying, oh, I would never make a decision about money. It's okay. I mean, Ira, you make decisions about money. I make decisions about money. Big O makes decisions. Everybody does. I just found it so Kyrie for him to come out and say he's daring to be different when he did what literally 99.9999999% of the human beings on the face of the planet would do in the exact same situation. So I want to ask you this. How do you think relative to the Heat this whole thing played out? My take was that the Heat's interest in Kyrie seemed to be tepid at best, and maybe if they could find a way to do it to where they weren't giving up really anything, and ending up with him to where like you're not messing with any of the core. If it works, then great. If not, we can kind of cut bait and move on. The interest in Kevin Durant obviously would have been much higher because of he's Kevin Durant, and yet I wouldn't have seen a path, and I don't even know if this thing is over with yet. I don't see a path where you could get a player the caliber of Kevin Durant without blowing up your roster, and that would include, to me, giving up Bam Adebayo. I just don't see any way that you could have done that. So what was your take when all this stuff was swirling, and not only that, but where it stands right now?
Well, it's interesting because one of my first question today at Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com was, hey, wait, the Heat were willing to give up Bam Adebayo for Kevin Durant? And again, the Heat were not willing to do anything. The Heat were in the preliminary discussions of seeing what it would take from Brooklyn if something was going to happen. I do agree with all the reporting out there. You can't mortgage your future for Kyrie Irving because you don't know if he's going to be there tomorrow. Even the Nets, let's face it, Kyrie Irving is coming back for this season on the one-year final year of his contract. That's all well and good. But is he going to feel like playing? Is he going to feel like playing on a Tuesday? Is he going to feel like playing after Election Day? Is he going to feel like playing on Boxing Day? You don't know with him. And that's the difference. That's why teams weren't willing to do that. Then you got to the Kevin Durant situation. Well, what if Kyrie actually does this and goes to the Lakers for $6.4 million and plays with LeBron, and they tell him, once we clear out Russell Westbrook's money, we can re-sign you to make up a bunch of the lost money a year from now. Then the Kevin Durant stuff started. Well, there's no way Kevin Durant, having lost James Harden, having then lost in that scenario, Kyrie Irving is going to stay. So what next? And people are putting together Heat deals. And on one hand, you could say, okay, what if you did trade Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, and Duncan Robinson to make the money work for Kevin Durant? Yes, you would have a very intriguing core of Durant, Jimmy Butler, and Kyle Lowry, arguably one that could win the Eastern Conference. You'd also be giving up 9 years difference between Kevin Durant, who's going to turn 34 this September, and Bam Adebayo, who's turning 25 in September. You're giving up the time. What about that risk also? I think at the end of the day, the Heat are almost, and I think this is true, Clay, for most of the league, exhaling. Fine. Brooklyn, you keep your mess over there. You still got the Ben Simmons thing going on. For us to have rejiggered and reconnoitered everything with a bunch of unhappy players, now we can go to free agency. It's interesting, Clay. Usually the biggest free agency story happens at 6:01. It might involve tampering, jumping the gun with Lonzo Ball, with Kyle Lowry, but that's the day that this sort of domino falls and everything falls. And if you remember in recent free agencies, LeBron waited a week and everyone waited. Then 2 years ago, Kawhi Leonard waited a week and everyone waited. This is the rare year where by far, no offense to Bradley Beal, like Big O mentioned in our crosstalk, it looks like he's resigning in Washington. But now that Kyrie and Kevin Durant have been, we think, resolved, and want to see Kyrie actually sign on the dotted line there, I think free agency will be a much more orderly process. And where it played out over 6-7 days in recent years, I think this could be almost NHL-like, where there could just be all hell breaking loose at 6 o'clock on Friday. Saturday, the second tier is taken care of. Sunday, the taxpayer mid-level and third tier is taken care of. And all of a sudden, we're washing our hands on July 4th and eating Frankfurters and watching fireworks, and we're sort of out of the process. So I think the league prefers the way this played out. They know the biggest story, the biggest roadblock is now out of the way, and they can proceed. Yes, for us in South Florida, PJ Tucker might be a big story. For those in New York and Dallas, Jalen Brunson might be the big story. But we're not talking Kawhi level. We're not talking LeBron level. And now apparently we're not talking Durant or Kyrie level either.
And let me go on the record. I would have been all for the Kyrie Irving deal to get him to South Florida. I just think you need that score so badly. And he would have fit. And who knows how it would have played out. But it would have been in the context of, you're not blowing up your roster in order to do it. It is getting a player that you are adding to the current core. And given the way the situation was playing out, it could have gone that direction. And I'm not 100% sure it still might not go that direction in some way. I mean, we may be talking about this in the next few weeks, few months, whatever, because who knows? Like you said, Kyrie could wake up on Boxing Day and not want to be there anymore. So make sure to drop your questions, your comments, hit the like button. We really appreciate it. It does us a lot of good. We really, it's a huge favor. So let's start. You mentioned PJ Tucker. Let's start with the players. And I would say, obviously, he's the current member of the Heat that can go elsewhere of his own volition. That is the biggest piece here. So normally I ask you something off the top. I'm going to pitch you my theory on this thing, and then I'll get your take on it. So we'll do a little bit reverse. We're going to dare to be different here, like Kyrie Irving. The Mark Stein report that it's looking like more likely than not, or however the phrasing was, that PJ is going to leave Miami and go to Philadelphia. The way I'm reading this, Ira, is PJ and his reps need as much leverage as they can up until the moment he signs on the dotted line. And unless there is somebody who is willing to give him that 3rd year guaranteed, why would the Miami Heat bid against themselves? I still feel like, and maybe I feel like I'm on an island here. Tell me if I'm crazy. I still feel like ultimately this thing is playing out to where if PJ Tucker remains with the Miami Heat, he ends up getting that 3rd year, and this leverage play ends up working. And I think whereas a few weeks ago, it would have been pretty unlikely that he would have gotten the full guarantee in the 3rd year. Now I think it's probably heading in that direction because of the leverage that has been and is currently still being created by the threat of Philadelphia. Tell me if I'm crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. You use the word leverage. I would use the word manipulation. Maybe in some thesaurus they're synonyms. Maybe in some place there aren't. But the gamesmanship here of getting this message out, I talked to someone in Philadelphia, and I asked, I don't get it. Right now, you don't have the 10.3 full taxpayer mid-level because you're above the tax line. In order to get below the tax line, you'd have to trade Matisse Thybulle basically for nothing. Might even have to move Furkan Korkmaz also to get below that tax line. You have work to do. Your books, you're showing me your books right now. Your books don't make sense. You can't get to that. So not only do you have to make move A to PJ Tucker, you have to make move B and move C, which we've seen is not always that easy. Yes, you might be able to get someone to take Matisse Thybulle for a future draft choice. He's a very good quality defender. Someone might be looking for that. Maybe someone who's lacking three-point shooting. You'll throw in a sweetener. They'll take Furkan Korkmaz also. Maybe. But you have work to do that in theory you can't necessarily get much of it done ahead of time. So I do think this is a total leverage play. But I also think it's putting it out to as many people as possible, to a local writer in Philadelphia, to a national writer with a big following, and creating that stir to see how much you can move Pat Riley. The one thing we've seen with Andy Ellisberg and Pat Riley, they're willing to go a little bit further for their kind of guy. So where there might have been a line drawn in the sand for an Hassan Whiteside or someone like that, where they say, or Jay Crowder, to be honest with you, where they say that's it, I think the lessons of Jay Crowder, where there wasn't a replacement player available, makes the difference. The difference is this. If you remember free agency in 2020, the season ended, what was it, in October, when the Heat were in the finals against the Lakers. Then we had the draft. Then we had free agency. There was no time to sort of get your ducks in order. This is different, Clay. The Heat now can look through the whole free agent list and saying, if we lose this player, unlike the chance they really had with when they went with Jay Crowder, who else can it be? And maybe they hear through the grapevine, we can get Thaddeus Young. We could make another move. The John Collins trade might happen. That might solve everything. So I think the Heat this time, unlike with Jay Crowder, have plan B, C, and D also, and they're going to let that somehow get back to PJ Tucker. Well, we love you for 1 year. We like you for 2 years. We'll consider you for a partial guarantee or some sort of thresholds that you can guarantee lock in that 3rd year. But we also have this guy over there on the hook, and we have that possible trade also. So you're going to be going back and forth there. I would be very surprised if we hear at 6:30 on Thursday, on the first day of free agency, that all of a sudden PJ Tucker is gone. I still think there's a lot of push-pull there. And I know this might sound like sacrilege to some Heat fans. I loved what PJ Tucker gave this team this year. I loved especially what he gave in the first half of the season. But I think the Heat can make do without PJ Tucker if they have to, because they're loyal to the core of the team they have right now. That unlike in 2020, they have that third element in Kyle Lowry, who I think is due for a bounce-back year, where in 2020 they sort of had Jimmy, they sort of had Bam, then they had some guys with Goran, I guess at the time, being the third guy. You also have Tyler Hero now, who, yes, was uneven in the playoffs, but had a 6th Man of the Year season. I think the Heat will be careful here. I think they'll get that message out to PJ. And you know what? If PJ wants to be a mercenary and go from winning a championship in Milwaukee to getting to the East Finals in Miami to losing in the Eastern semifinals with the Sixers, because they always lose in the Eastern Conference semifinals, then, hey, this goes back to the Kyrie, and you do chase the money that even the most loyal, all-in win kind of guy at the end of the day says, you know what? 30 million is more than 20 million. And I'm going to go in that direction. And Clay, you and I might be talking when I'm in Vegas next week, and we're going to look at all these signings, and you're going to say what you said at the top of the show today. Money, 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 money. And at the end of the day, Bradley Beal getting more money right there when it's going back to Washington. Kyrie Irving keeping his money. John Wall only giving up as much money as he gets on the taxpayer mid-level from the Clippers. This might very well be what all of these free agencies are, the offseason of the dollar.
And let's make clear, it's that way for all of us. Now, that doesn't mean that you just take the job that offers you the most money. It means that you explore every avenue, but that, yeah, the money is probably the most important thing when choosing your next line of work, your next place of work, whatever it happens to be. So it's okay. Like, we can talk about this. It's all right. It's okay to chase the money. It's okay to do those sorts of things. I just happen to think that you made the point a couple of weeks ago that the Heat are going to learn from the Jay Crowder mistake. My issue with letting PJ Tucker go would be creating another hole. And right now, I think there is an enormous void, an enormous hole when it comes to a true wing scorer, somebody who can come in and just get you a bucket. That other guy that crunch time, you're scared of him if you're the other team. And that's where Kyrie Irving would have been great. Some people seem to think Tyler Hero can jump into that role. I'm not so sure. I'd rather you go get that guy right now. That's a hole on this team. If PJ Tucker walks, you're automatically creating another hole on this team. And a hole that's like unique in a sense that, yeah, sure, you can change your line. I wasn't a big fan of adding Jeremy Grant. I know a lot of people were thrilled about the idea. I don't think he brings the element that PJ Tucker does, which is, man, you got a guy who can guard Trae Young 85 feet from the basket. You have somebody who is just like the perfect Miami Heat type player, the mentality, and that extra guy that fits in perfectly with the rest of this roster. Now, I'll say this. If there's another deal to be made out there, and OG Anunoby is a name that we've heard floating around, not necessarily connected to the Miami Heat, but pretty much connected to everybody, that there's some friction there in Toronto. They don't know the fit with Scotty Barnes and some of the rest of the young core that they've got going on up there. If you do something like that and you've got that waiting, then okay. But I don't just create another hole because you want to go to a full guarantee in the third year and you want to fight on that. Because you brought up a good point last week, Ira. You're taking Kyle Lowry's salary off the books in that third year of a hypothetical PJ Tucker contract. So you're dealing with a different salary situation. Obviously, maybe you have the Tyler Hero contract. There are just a lot of other things at play here, and I would not want to create that other hole when you've already got one right there that's glaring that you've got to attack and use your assets to fill. I mean, am I nuts there? Or am I obviously there are other options, but what would be, I guess, the next path if that went down that way?
And again, I know we're up against the break, so I'll give you my thought and then we can go to the break, but I think you're overstating the lack of void of a scorer for this reason. Teams just have the guy, the main guy in crunch time who gets the ball. Even in Brooklyn, it's pretty much Kevin Durant. Jimmy Butler's going to be that player. Jimmy Butler might take the three-pointer you hate, but he is set up on this team that he is that guy. That there's one guy who's going to get the ball isolated on the wing and set it up. You mentioned Tyler Hero, and you know what? Let's not overstate the playoffs as the ultimate scar on his career. It's crazy, Clay. It's almost like Tyler Hero will never be the same player ever again because he dared play while injured during the playoffs. But the name we're leaving out, and very few other teams have this that the Heat have, is Victor Oladipo. They have his bird rights. This is not a matter of giving up an exception. This is not a matter of having to fight off other teams at that same price point. They do have Victor Oladipo, who has been more active on social media in the last week than every other Heat player combined, showing his workouts on Instagram and what he's doing and his dedication. So you could say to yourself, you know what? Even if we don't fill that scoring void externally, what if Tyler takes another step after Sixth Man of the Year? What if Victor Oladipo, all Eric Spoelstra told us is this is a work in progress, and most players would not have even come back this year like Victor Oladipo did from his injury. It would have been a Kawhi Leonard kind of year. So they might have that scoring internally, so you can just say we can use the full mid-level, we can use the taxpayer mid-level to get our power forward because we have Big O. And Yurt's going to play more this year. And this kid, Orlando Robinson, we have at Summer League, should have gone drafted, and we have him there also. So there might be other options there also. So I think the lack of that other wing scorer, yes, you might want to have someone else, but if you bring back Victor Oladipo, and if Tyler Hero, this guy's working already, makes another stride, I think you might be able to compensate for that, because here's the deal. Either Jimmy Butler's going to get it done or not get it done. But you only have one alpha scorer because there's still only one ball and one rim. So I think it still is going to come down to Jimmy Butler. Next step, can he do it at 33, at 34?
Next segment, let's start to get to your questions, your comments, and what you might be wanting to know as we get into these last 48 hours before this whole thing tips off. That's coming up next right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.